Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the Wire Wrap. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. A 71-year-old lawyer just a couple of days back hurled a shoe at the Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gavai, in the name of Sanatan Dharma. Now, after this incident, right-wing pro-Hindutva groups on social media have felt empowered, emboldened to the extent of sharing very casteist imagery on social media and cheering this attack, which has in fact been condemned by Prime Minister Modi, but not in the terms that it should have. Meanwhile, in Cuttack, communal clashes broke out after Durga Puja celebrations during the immersion of that idol, with the VHP defying orders of the state government for a shutdown. At the same time, US President Donald Trump has cheered a peace plan that he claims has been brokered in Gaza. And Prime Minister Modi has also wished Donald Trump and congratulated him a total of 4 times in one day. So what does all this mean? To discuss all this, I'm being joined by Siddharth Varadarajan. He's founding editor at The Wire, and Saba Naqvi. She's an independent journalist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Let's get started with the attack on Gavai. The fact that the attack has been widely reported as a culmination of weeks of anger on social media. This was following, just to tell our viewers, this was following his remarks during a hearing at a PIL hearing in the Supreme Court, which demanded the restoration of a dilapidated structure of Lord Vishnu. And Justice Gavai said that go and pray to your God. Now that angered right-wing groups and this particular lawyer, Rakesh Kishore, so much that he went and hurled a shoe at the Chief Justice, which missed the Chief Justice. But these groups claim that it was a justified attack for insulting Sanatan Dharma. So after this attack, there has been condemnation that has come in from all quarters. Prime Minister Modi also condemned it, even though very late in the day. But the fact that these right-wing groups are now not acknowledging the casteist nature of this attack and instead saying that this was an attack on Justice Gavai himself because of his remarks particularly. How do you see this?
First of all, I'd like to say that it's not just the right-wing groups. Even the media ignored the casteist aspects of it. In my view, it was fundamentally an attack on him because of his caste. A shoe was taken out and it was hurled. This is the kind of insult you historically say for Dalits. Just in case I was wrong about it, I took the trouble to call up a Dalit member of parliament from a progressive party. And he said, even in our parties, ultimately, the food, nobody will ask the Dalits about who's ordering the food. I checked. I said, how do you see it? Am I getting it wrong? That this would not have happened to maybe a D.Y. Chandrachud, maybe, but this was happened only because Gavai is a Dalit. So he said, you're absolutely right. All of us Dalit groups, we all know this is fundamentally a casteist attack. So what is happening over here? The Chief Justice retires in a month from now. He was extraordinarily a Dalit who reached that position. It is a demeaning of that man. And what I found amazing, and I don't think it's deliberate because there were some liberal people who were at the heart of it. I saw a whole debate that night on television by liberal people where they kept on saying affront to the constitutional values, affront to the institution. They did not mention caste, because maybe they didn't recognize it as such, because we, in everywhere that we go, even the world which we inhabit in the media, we don't actually have enough Dalit representation. And so neither is it among lawyers, neither is it. So I only took this position after I checked with a Dalit, an empowered Dalit. And I said, how do you see it? Of course, it is a caste insult first. Everything else follows from that.
And I think any doubts about the casteist nature of this attack was probably seen just hours after, when we saw that very disturbing AI-generated video on social media, which showed Justice Gavai with an earthen pot around his neck, which is a reference to centuries-old depiction of the humiliation that that Dalits were subjected to, and a shoe being used to slap him. But later, Rakesh Kishore, who was the next day seen giving interviews to all and sundry, said that maybe I'm a Dalit, maybe I'm not. But the same night, he went to Op India and he said that I am a Dalit. So that, so what I mean to ask is that how do you see this argument that there's an effort now to shift the narrative away from the fact that this was in fact a casteist attack?
I don't think the media ever acknowledged it. I don't think the BJP, the Prime Minister's own tweet, in fact, I would read his tweet and his praise for Justice Gawai's restraint as part of the typical casteist sort of reading of the importance of suffering. You know, Modi himself wrote a book when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. Later on, they got rid of the book because, you know, a huge controversy erupted about what he wrote about Safai Karamcharis, when he said that the Safai Karamchari, the Dalits who are involved in this demeaning form of labor, compelled to do that over generations, he said that this is for them. The reason they have not abandoned that so-called profession is because they see it as a spiritual exercise. You know, so this is the approach of that. You know, you should suffer. It's very good that you're suffering. In your suffering is your redemption. You know, the Prime Minister's response in the face of this attack should have been to, first of all, ensure that justice is done, and you cannot leave it to Chief Justice Gawai. You know, I can understand his reluctance in wanting to be judge in his own case. He's not going to plead and argue that I've been offended, that the court has been offended, that there's contempt of court. You know, it's not for him to press his own case. It's for the Prime Minister of this country who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, who ought to understand the significance of what has happened and to ensure that justice is done. Instead, you have a situation where the Prime Minister, you know, makes a public statement many hours after this incident, long after everybody in the opposition has spoken, long after it has become clear that fellow travelers of the Sangh Parivar on social media were looking at this and glorifying this as a casteist atrocity, actually. They were celebrating the fact that here was a Dalit who this man had humiliated, right? So as a Prime Minister, don't you have a responsibility to, you know, ensure that corrective steps are taken? He did nothing of the sort. The police took no action. And it's been, what, about a week? It's been about 4 or 5 days since then. This man is busy giving interviews, justifying what he did, said he'll do it again, and so on. So no remorse. There's no action. The system has simply decided to let this go by. The media has ignored it. And, you know, they don't see it for what it is, which is an attack on Dalits. It's an attack on the Constitution. It's an attack on the, you know, the independence of the judiciary. You are browbeating a judge. And I want to add that it's not just his, you know, this Kishore chap's criticism of the Chief Justice's remarks on God. After all, what the Chief Justice said was in the context of a argument in court where the litigant was kept pressing his point even after he was told that, look, there is no locus here for us to hear this, to take up this matter. And, you know, there is a long tradition in India of rationalists saying, look, you know, God is not going to solve our problems. Like, you know, these are problems that we have to deal with ourselves. So it's in that context and spirit that Justice Gawai spoke. And you make that a big issue. But this Kishore, in an interview, also said he was upset about Justice Gawai's verdict and comments on you know, the you know, bulldozer politics of these BJP governments. So there's a whole bunch of issues that obviously were weighing on his mind, and I would say on the mind of the ecosystem he represents. So I see this as an attack, of course, on the Chief Justice, on his identity as a Dalit, on Dalits as a whole. It's also an attack on judges as a whole, because you're telling judges, you give a verdict against us, you try to put a roadblock in what we are attempting to bulldoze this country into, we will take steps against you. And I think that's what's so chilling about it.
So since you spoke about the fact that these groups have are feeling emboldened in a certain sense. An equivalence that has been drawn is with the Nupur Sharma case. A lot of these tweets on social media are talking about the fact that there's a hypocrisy that has been shown by the court, and Justice Gavai, with his statements that he had made, had it coming because loose tongue is what Op India has called Justice Gavai's comments. But the interesting part is that Prime Minister Modi has also not been spared. Even in his statement of condemnation, there are comments which are attacking Modi himself, saying that you were not able to speak up for Hindus, and you are not mentioning the reason why he's faced such an attack. So what does that say,
I
really?
think there is a very clear restructuring of the idea of what Hinduism is. It is not a religion of the book. So not that one is, I am an atheist, but it's not a religion of the book. So you don't have one prophet, one God, one holy text. You have, and this whole thing about Sanatan Dharma has always been to make it criminal, to say anything about, is to define Hinduism in a very firm way. And look, the whole thing started off with the comments of Udayanidhi, Stalin's son, some years ago when he took on Sanatan Dharma because of the own history of Tamil Nadu. So this is just a threat that you say, and there was nothing much that Gavai was saying in the context of the case. But there is one more point that you raised, that Mr. Kishore says he's a Dalit. Gavai is also an Ambedkarite, no? His father, if from what I have read on social media, is somebody who converted to Buddhism with Dr. Ambedkar. So he represents a certain stream within the Dalit community. He's a Maharashtrian Dalit. I think he belongs to Maharashtra, as did Dr. Ambedkar. And the whole idea, if you're saying that there was visual images of him being depicted carrying certain vessels as Dalits are depicted over there, that is why Bhima Koregaon is so sensitive, because the Dalits fought with the British against the cruelties that they were subjected to in an empire which is sort of seen as the ultimate Hindu empire. So there are so many historical threads which are touched over here. So, when you say that he's saying I'm also a Dalit, even within the Dalit fold there are arguments. But it's not just that. I also want to add one thing, that because I was troubled by this incident. So then I made a lot of calls, and I discovered that even in the services, when especially those who get into IITs and engineering, people are excluded. So it's terrible what happens to Muslims, but we talk about it, we are open about it, we chronicle it, at least in certain spaces we do. This is something which is often not illegal. This kind of insidious casteism, which ends up with people committing suicide and all, it's quite common. This is something which is often, it is not open, it's not overt, it's not even illegal. The act against the Chief Justice was illegal. But mental trauma, constant humiliation, constant demeaning of people who get into system through reservation, it is not something that we very often analyze and discuss over here. So, I want to say that that's actually quite, because it's harder to capture it as something so fundamentally wrong in our society.
So before we move on from this, I want to ask you, Siddharth, that the fact that these groups are pushing back even on Modi's comment, and he's facing criticism from these pro-Hindutva, ultra-Hindutva groups, does that imply in a certain way that the government has lost control of the very groups that they have cultivated to promote their own cause?
Well, that's a good question, and I want to make 2 points. One in direct response to that, and the other point which we see on social media of, what happens if the judge had made a comment about Islam or the Prophet. Now, it is the nature of right-wing politics I would say any kind of extremist politics, but particularly right-wing identity-based politics, that it becomes a bottomless pit. You go down that path, you will further be forced to climb lower and lower, to descend lower and lower. So, for every god-awful statement that a BJP person, officially a BJP person makes, or even the Prime Minister made during the election campaign of 2024, anti-Muslim statements, communal statements, he may use guarded language, but you create then a situation where others are more direct, are more offensive. And there is a race to be more offensive, to be more extreme. This is the politics here. So, yes, there will always be people on the right who will say, oh, the Prime Minister should have defended this Kishore guy. The Prime Minister is not a true Hindu. And the Prime Minister, and you see the BJP's politics, a lot of their political posturing is driven by this dynamic. So as the center keeps shifting more and more to the right, you find the BJP, the RSS, Modi himself also going in that direction. So this is the inevitability of right-wing politics. It's not as if there is any fundamental gulf between Modi and these trolls. But question of how you express yourself, how politic you are, how diplomatic you are. Modi, as Prime Minister, given a certain position he occupies, would like to be somewhat guarded in his language, would be somewhat measured in what he says, although the mask slips at election time, when he will come and say awful things, right? But so that's as far as the sort of right on right is concerned. The other issue, right? Even if Justice Gawai or some other judge had made a comment similar to what was said on Vishnu about the Prophet or Allah, that doesn't justify somebody chucking a shoe, right? So we have to be very, very clear here. And essentially what these trolls or others who are trying to set up a kind of bogus argument, what they're trying to say that somehow Hindus are being singled out. If you had, and I presented this as a counterfactual. I said, can you imagine for a second if a Muslim in court, acting on any issue close to his heart or her heart, had thrown a shoe at a judge? Can you imagine what kind of response there would have been from the Prime Minister down? I mean, what you've seen is nothing compared to the kind of crazy outbursts that you would have if such a situation were to happen. So I think there is no equivalence at all. People are just trying to, set up straw men. The fact is that you have a fanatic driven by, irrational hatred, driven by a sort of a sense that as a Hindu in a so-called Hindu Rashtra, he has a right to take law into his own hands. And sadly, the experience of you have so many examples of self-appointed Hindus, self-appointed Sanatanis, taking the law into their own hands, lynching somebody, shooting somebody, doing all kinds of things against the law, and the law doesn't take action against them, right? So that culture of impunity, which unfortunately Modi has spawned, is what has produced a Kishore taking this act. So I think that we need to be very, very clear about this aspect.
All right. So before we wrap up on this aspect, also a similar thread that's carrying into this is going into Cuttack, where we saw communal violence last week after Durga Puja celebrations, and idols were taken for immersion, and that resulted in some clashes, which happened because apparently violence broke out between two groups when one of them, including Muslim boys, was seen fighting a pitch battle with stones and glass bottles. The trigger was a high decibel procession with DJ music accompanying the immersion procession while it was passing through one area, which was a Muslim populated area. Some people also objected to selection of certain songs which included Jai Shri Ram slogans. But what happened the next day is more interesting, is the fact that the administration imposed orders to restrict the violence, and there were shutdown orders, but the VHP organized a rally in Cuttack on October 5th, and in an apparent show of strength defied the local administration orders. And this was not the first case of a communal attack in Odisha since the Mohan Maji government has come to power. So why do you think this is happening in such quick succession since this new government?
Odisha has a very small Muslim population, but it has a double engine BJP Sarkar right now. Odisha is also where years ago Graham Steins and his family was lynched. So it has tribal areas. So you have a well structured RSS, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, all of that, okay? And but I actually, going by what I looked up, the information from what I gather, there was a personal clash, but it was the VHP Yatra which led to injuries of the police. They were violent. If you see some of the footage, they're smashing things, they're walking around, and they wanted certain areas cleared of Muslims. So what we have to, just picking up from what Siddharth was referring to, is in the context of the earlier one on the Chief Justice, this majority victimhood syndrome that it's very common from India to the US that the majority feels that its gods are being insulted, or it is told, or there is a mob in the majority who goes around claiming that they are vulnerable, that they are being insulted, that the administration should clear out the Muslims. And so this is the information I gathered from a responsible paper like The Hindu, which has a good explainer also coming to the show, that it was actually the violence went out of hand, and the police is quoted as saying that the VHP just completely ignored their orders and went, I mean, I don't, this is, you can only go by the cops when they say this. So we've seen this pattern of the VHP, Bajrang Dal and all, the syndrome of going through Muslim areas, having provocative slogans. There's even been a report called Roots of Fire, or Roots of, which has 21, 22, which referred to the processions that went out during Ram Navami and Hanuman Jayanti all over India. A report was put together, and it's the only form of what they call mobilization that is actually permitted in BJP ruled states. Everything else is anti-national. If students protest, it's anti-national. If farmers protest, it's anti-national. If somebody like Sonam Wangchuk protests, of course, it's a threat to the nation. But these guys going around with their cycle rallies is what is allowed mobilization in India. That's all.
So Sabha says that this is kind of a pattern that has emerged in several BJP ruled states. Odisha in that sense has become a BJP ruled state very recently. It had never been so. But former Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik has said that this is very disturbing, that this has happened in Cuttack. But this is not the first time that this has happened under this government. In Balasore, there were riots last year. Christian community has been attacked. There is a sense, a lot of analysts are saying that the Mohan Maji government has lost control of Hindutva groups. Do you buy this argument?
See, there is no question of the state or the government losing control. It's a question of the state or the government refusing to assert itself. In all of these, Odisha saw horrible riots when Vajpayee was Prime Minister and Naveen Patnaik then decided to break with the BJP. And for the longest time, you had communal peace in Odisha. It's a state well known for its sort of communal harmony. The BJP comes to power, and you then see all of these Hindutva groups then working hard to trigger incidents of violence. And so there's nothing surprising about this. This is the modus operandi, and they will use processions in order to create confrontations, in order to trigger confrontations, and in order to then have an excuse for rioting and violence. And I just want to mention, since we were talking of Justice Gavai and his judgment on against the use of bulldozers, he was very clear that bulldozers can't be used as a punitive measure because you suspect somebody of rioting or suspect somebody of breaking the law. The fact is that in 9/10, so maybe 95 out of 100 punitive demolitions, the target is always Muslims. And in Gujarat, we saw recently, again, outside of Gandhinagar in a village where there was a similar sort of a situation as in Odisha, the administration just the other day demolished more than 100 properties of Muslims who they said were involved in violence and were habitual offenders, and who had, the state suddenly discovered that they had encroached and built illegal properties. There will be no such exercise in Odisha. Trust me. I'd be very surprised if the VHP and Bajrang Dal and all these guys who were involved in violence, will find homes and shops that they may have illegally built or constructed or extended being targeted, right? So I think that this further underlines the impunity that Hindutva groups believe they enjoy and which the system gives them. It's nothing to do with the weakness or the unwillingness of the state to curb violence. This is, I would say, in Hindi, as they say, Mili Bhagat. You have the state turning a blind eye, and this kind of violence being used to kind of increase the footprint of the BJP, increase the footprint of the Sangh Parivar. That's precisely what's happening.
All right, let's also shift focus now to Gaza, because that's where a peace plan is allegedly underway. This is after Trump announced that Israel and Palestinian organization Hamas have signed off on the phase 1 of the Gaza peace plan. Now, Israel's military, according to Al Jazeera reports earlier today, started to pull back troops after the government approved phase 1 of the ceasefire. While announcing this, Donald Trump said that this means that all of the hostages will be released very soon and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps towards strong, durable and everlasting peace. However, analysts have raised certain questions about this. The first is the fact that the withdrawal of the Israel troops to a certain line in Gaza is not exactly a deal, because ultimately they remain in Gaza and a little over half of the Gaza Strip along with their firepower, so they have the capability to reoccupy if they do come out of there in the first place. The other contentious element is allowing an aid and the release of Palestinian prisoners. So how must one see this peace plan where the wider details are not clear yet?
So I think if I take that first, I think it's useful to look at Trump's initiative, which is being hailed universally, including by our Prime Minister 4 times in one day, as you said, to look at it as comprising several parts. The first part and the most important part is bringing about a ceasefire. And the reason the world has welcomed Trump's sort of quote-unquote plan or initiative is precisely because there is an urgent need to bring an end to the genocidal violence that Israel has been inflicting on the people of Gaza, which has killed nearly 70,000 people, and which has brought the entire region, the Gaza Strip, to the brink of starvation. So ending the genocide, ending the violence is a necessary first step, and I think Hamas has done well to sort of hold its nose to all the unpleasant aspects of what Trump is proposing, to say, look, come what may, we need to have a ceasefire in place. We need to stop this violence, stop the killing. The second aspect is, and equally important, is the release of Israeli hostages that Hamas seized 2 years ago in violation of law, blatant violation of law. And of course, the release of Palestinian prisoners held on trumped up charges by the Israeli occupation authorities. And there is supposed to be a kind of sequencing of this. So the release of prisoners is also equally important. The Israeli hostages must immediately be able to go home, and the Palestinian prisoners must immediately be freed. Israel, of course, is trying to finesse and set conditions. There's talk of the prisoners being released, being forced into exile, so they have to leave the West Bank and go abroad. There's also, I've seen some reports of the Israeli cabinet refusing to release Mustafa Barghouti, who's a very prominent, very important Palestinian leader. He's been in jail for more than a decade now. Many call him the Nelson Mandela of the Palestinians. It's essential that people like him, who can give a direction and leadership to the people of Palestine at this time, be able to do their work. But of course, Israel is not going to allow them to do that. So there are some wrinkles as far as who gets released and when they get released. The third aspect is the sort of the peace plan, the settlement part of Trump's proposal, which in my view is completely bogus. It's bogus because it's aimed at finding ways to cement the to prettify the Israeli occupation. It says nothing about ending Israel's illegal possession of Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Gaza, something that the International Court of Justice says Israel must vacate immediately. It says nothing of putting an end to the Israeli settlements where they've grabbed Palestinian land and forcibly settled their own people there. There are lots of issues that are that the Trump plan completely ignores. Quite apart from some of the crazy features like bringing Blair and having a sort of international overseeing authority, no UN involvement at all. So I think this element of Trump's proposal was always going to be the most difficult, controversial one. No Palestinian would be willing to accept that. So I think Hamas has done well to sequence this, right? Trump, if you recall, when the plan was unveiled, said this is an all or nothing deal, and Hamas has 3 days to accept it. Well, Hamas was able to break it down and say, let's do the ceasefire, let's get those captives and hostages released, and we then talk about what comes next. And I think that this is where you're going to see the patience of regional powers and the international community tested. And I think how much they're able to push the US away from the crazier notions that Trump is advocating, that much better it will be for the people of Palestine.
How do you see Trump's role in this?
First of all, I think Siddharth has given a very good overview. So let me say something rhetorical. and political. I think there is a problem in the domestic public opinion in the US, even Trump's constituency, some of them really oppose what's happening in Israel. I don't think, I think there's just the whole world has actually, large sections of the world have turned against Israel. In Italy, you're seeing huge streets blocked. In Spain, the people are coming out in the roads because of the acute suffering that has gone on and this savagery that has been unleashed on Palestinians, from destroying their cities to starving their children to executing the media. How many journalists have been died? So there is a public relations problem that the West, because ultimately it's an imperial project, carries with it in its baggage. Of course, we in India, very disappointingly, I have to say that when this acceptance of the plan was announced, our Prime Minister actually praised the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is, according to the International Court of Justice, he should be tried for war crimes. And so that's, I'm not happy about that. But having said that, I think it's just going to be an eyewash for the moment to show that we tried for less suffering. Because even in January, February last year, I happened to be in Turkey at that time, and there was people were weeping and crying because they again said there was a ceasefire, and the Hamas guys were coming out and they were releasing them, and the Israelis were taking them, and there was such relief in the region. And then the Israelis went in and bombed everybody to smithereens, and after that even worse brutality began. So I just think it's just optics. I don't think Trump has got the Nobel Peace Prize. It's gone to someone else. So that's over. So we don't know what goes on in that mind. Is it that Tucker Carlson has said something today, somebody else has said something today? One cannot anticipate a mind like Donald Trump. And then, of course, there was this plan that it should be real estate and we can have a resort over there. And I believe his son-in-law, who is a real estate developer, was also involved in the negotiations. So I think you've got the same explanation, understanding from Siddharth Varadarajan. I don't trust anything that's happening. And I don't trust the motives behind it. I don't trust what the Israelis have done. And I think the only reason, they obviously don't care about Palestinian lives. The only reason they've done it is because the West has also begun to protest. Their own constituency has begun to protest.
So because you're speaking of the fact that the West has also begun to protest, I want to bring in the fact that Modi has wished Trump so many times, and what has Trump's role been over this, that is the result of the general global order appreciating the peace plan as it is. The fact that Trump's tariffs are going to affect a lot of countries in the world, is it a kind of a generation of goodwill and therefore they're appreciating this, or is it not related to the tariff issue at all?
No, I think there's two aspects to it. I think there is obviously the flattery aspect, right? The desire to placate the ego of this completely egotistical man, right? And what better way to do it than to praise him and so on and so forth. So there is some of that, right? But I think more importantly, people around the world, even if governments are not so moved, but people in millions around the world are angry, upset, sad, horrified at what Israel has been doing. And I think that the way in which reports have been multiplying of not just civilian deaths, starvation, I think that governments are just desperate for this genocide to come to an end. And I think that if Trump's very controversial so-called peace plan is the way to at least bring about a stop to the genocide, governments say, fine, let's do it, right? And I think that from the point of view of the Palestinian Authority, they also welcomed the plan because they saw this as a necessary first step to stopping the killing. There's another point that I think is important, which we sometimes lose sight of. When Trump became president when he sort of came to office, right, January this year, within days there was a similar ceasefire plan that had been agreed upon, which was going to lead to a cessation of the violence and a release of prisoners and hostages. Netanyahu walked away from that. Why did he walk away? He walked away because he was convinced that he could somehow push ahead with a military victory. And he convinced the US, or maybe the US encouraged him to try his luck for the next 5-6 months. The fact that Netanyahu has been compelled to accept a ceasefire means that the Israeli military, despite its genocide, despite the overwhelming military superiority of the IDF, has been unable to conquer and vanquish the people of Gaza. I think that is a very, very significant lesson. People, should not lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, the military might of Israel may have inflicted a terrible toll on the people of Palestine, on the people of Gaza, but they could not force them to their knees. And so that's another way to look at what Trump has accomplished. And I think we should not lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza will emerge and live to assert their rights, to fight for their right to self-determination, to fight for the cause of an independent Palestine another day.
All right, so we'll have to leave it at that, and we'll have to see how this peace plan really pans out in the coming days. Thank you so much, Siddharth and Saba, for joining us, and to the viewers for watching.